Guys, imagine your best gaming friend suddenly stops replying to your messages. You'd think their internet went out, right? But what if the reality was a million times worse? This is the terrifying story of a 13-year-old girl named Maya. She knew her neighbor was watching her, but when she begged for help, nobody believed her. Her family told her she was just exaggerating, and that mistake led to a real-life nightmare. If you think Roblox is just a safe place to hang out, this video will change your mind. Drop a like right now, because you won't believe how this shocking mystery ends. Let's get right into it. There are some very disturbing cases in Roblox, like the one I'm going to tell you about today, where a player was horribly kidnapped in real life. Ethan, who lived through all of this, begins by telling us that it all started in a completely normal neighborhood. It was one of those places where everyone knows each other by sight, where kids play in the street and adults say hello when they take out the trash. Ethan was 14 years old. He was just a regular kid who goes to school, comes home, does his homework more or less, and then spends the rest of the day in his room on his phone. In that same neighborhood lived Maya, a 13-year-old girl. They had known each other for a very long time, but only in the way you know a neighbor you barely ever talk to. They only exchanged a quick hello when they passed each other, nothing more. One day, they met on the street without going anywhere in particular and started talking about YouTubers. And at some point in that conversation, the topic of Roblox came up. Neither of them had ever played it before, but they were both curious. It was Maya who suggested trying it first, and that same afternoon, they each downloaded it from their own homes. They started playing almost every single day, sometimes talking through voice chat, and other times meeting up in person. Ethan says it was one of those friendships that form very fast and very strong, the kind you don't expect at all. Before Roblox, they barely spoke, and suddenly, they were spending hours together every day. But this is where the story starts to get dark. In that neighborhood, there was a neighbor, a man in his 40s, whom Ethan describes as very weird. And when he says weird, he doesn't mean bad-looking or mean. He means that kind of strangeness that's hard to put into words, but you can just feel it. He lived completely alone, almost never went outside, and when he did, he always looked down at the ground or to the sides, as if he didn't want anyone to see his face. Nobody knew what he did for work. Nobody knew a single thing about him. One day, while they were playing Roblox on voice chat, Maya said something that gave Ethan absolute chills. She told him she had been noticing really strange things about that neighbor. She explained how, over the last few days, he had been looking at her in a very creepy way, and how one afternoon, walking home from school, she felt like someone was watching her. When she turned around, she saw the neighbor standing in his doorway, staring straight at her. When Maya looked him in the eye, he didn't look away. He just kept staring until she went inside, totally frightened. She also told him that one morning, when she looked out her bedroom window, the man was standing in the street, looking directly at her room. As soon as Maya saw him, he went back inside his house. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Her window didn't face a main path where people usually walk. To look in that direction, you had to be deliberately staring right at it. And she told him that one day, when she went out to throw away the trash, the man was standing right there and said, "Hello," for the first time in years. Just that, a simple hello. But the way he said it, and the way he looked at her while he did it, chilled her to the bone. Ethan told her to tell her parents everything immediately, and Maya replied that she already had. But her mother told her not to exaggerate, saying that the neighbor was harmless and had lived in the neighborhood for years without causing any trouble. Guys, this is exactly the most dangerous thing that can happen in these situations. That "don't exaggerate" phrase not only didn't solve anything, but it silenced her, made her doubt her own instincts. And that silence was exactly what that terrifying man needed to take action. Now I'm going to tell you what Maya went through, because her side of the story is the absolute worst part. That day, she left school at her usual time. She had plans to play Roblox with Ethan in the afternoon, so she was in a big hurry. She stopped for just a moment at the supermarket on the corner. 5 minutes. Nothing out of the ordinary. What Maya didn't know was that this man had been following her for weeks, not just watching her from his doorway. He knew exactly what time Maya left school. He knew the route she took to get home, and he knew exactly when she would be completely alone. The moment she walked out of the supermarket, the man was right there, leaning against the wall with a shopping bag in his hand, acting like he had just finished shopping too. He even smiled at her. He said what a coincidence it was and offered to walk with her for a bit since they were heading in the same direction. Maya felt that same chill as always, but she accepted it because it was broad daylight on a street she knew by heart, so she figured nothing bad could happen. Halfway there, the man told her he had left something in his car, which was just a few meters away, and asked her to wait a second. And Maya waited, just so she wouldn't seem rude. What happened next was incredibly fast and terrifying. Maya remembers the man's hand suddenly grabbing her arm. She remembers trying to scream and something covering her mouth before she could even react. She remembers a strange chemical smell and her legs instantly giving out. The next thing she knew, she was completely losing consciousness. When she finally woke up, she was in a dark basement. There were no windows at all. A single light bulb that gave off a weak yellowish light hung from the ceiling. The floor was solid cement and it was freezing cold. The neighbor had left her a mattress, a blanket, and a single bottle of water. The very first thing she did was scream as loudly as she could for as long as possible, until her throat burned and her voice completely left her. No one ever answered, and then came the heavy silence. Maya says the silence was almost worse than the fear itself, because it's in the silence that your mind starts to race, and the thoughts that come to you when you are locked in a basement, not knowing if anyone knows where you are or what the man who put you there wants, are absolutely horrible. You wouldn't wish those thoughts on your worst enemy. The man came down once. He didn't do anything physically to her on that first visit. He just stared at her. He stood in the doorway for what felt like several minutes to Maya and didn't say a single word. Then he left and locked the door again. Maya says that was almost the most terrifying part of all, because she couldn't understand what he wanted, and not knowing what someone who has you locked up wants is a kind of psychological torture that completely destroys your mind. Hours passed without windows, without a cell phone, without anything. Only that light bulb that never turned off scanned every inch of the bare walls. The door was heavy metal and locked tightly from the outside. There was absolutely no way out. At some point, she stopped crying because she simply had no tears left. And in that strange, numb place that comes after crying, when you can't take it anymore, she lay completely still on the floor and thought about Ethan. She figured he would immediately notice she wasn't online to play games. She convinced herself that when Ethan realized she was gone, he would eventually tell someone everything she had confessed about the creepy neighbor, so they would start looking for her. She clung to that single thought with all her might. It was the only thing she had left at that moment. Meanwhile, complete chaos had already erupted at Maya's house. Her mother had been calling her phone for hours without an answer. She had gone to the school, called all her friends, walked the path back home twice, and found absolutely nothing. Late that afternoon, Maya's father called the police to report her missing. The officers told them to wait a few hours, since in most cases teenagers reappear on their own. But if there was still no news by the next day, they would open an official investigation. Her mother spent the entire night sleepless, sitting on the sofa with her phone glued to her hand, dialing her daughter's number every 10 minutes, even though she knew deep down she wouldn't answer. Ethan, still unaware that his friend had vanished, had also been waiting for hours. Maya hadn't logged online, wasn't replying to his messages, and wasn't answering any calls. He tried to convince himself there must be some normal reason, but something was tight in his chest, keeping him completely restless. The next day, Maya didn't show up at school. When Ethan saw her empty chair, his stomach completely turned. As soon as he got home, he went straight to his dad and told him everything about the neighbor. The weird looks, the window, the hello that had chilled him to the bone, everything. His father listened closely and said he understood his worry, but they couldn't just accuse a neighbor without having any real proof. The neighbor was strange, sure, but being weird wasn't a crime you could lock someone up for. Ethan tells us that at that exact moment, his eyes filled with tears. It wasn't anger toward his dad, it was pure desperation. Because something deep inside him was absolutely certain that this neighbor had something to do with Maya's disappearance. So he begged his father to just go to the neighbor's door. His father hesitated, but Ethan begged so hard that he finally agreed. They went over together, knocked, and the neighbor actually answered. Ethan describes that moment in great detail. The man calmly opened the door, looked at them both without flinching, and asked how he could help in a completely normal, friendly voice, as if he were the most innocent person in the world. When they asked about Maya, he said he hadn't seen her for days and hoped nothing bad had happened to her. He said all of this with a calmness that Ethan describes as chilling. They left. On the way back, Ethan tells us that his father said the neighbor seemed like a perfectly normal man and that they couldn't do anything more without evidence. Then Ethan stopped right in the middle of the street, turned to his father, and completely burst into tears. Not in a dramatic, angry way. It was the kind of crying you do when you are completely hopeless and desperate. He tearfully told him that he knew Maya was in there, that he wasn't asking his dad to break in or do anything illegal, just to call the police, and that if he was wrong, if the police came and found nothing, he promised he would do everything his dad asked without question until he turned 18. His father looked at him silently for a few seconds, then finally took out his cell phone and called the police. At that same moment, down in the basement, Maya had already been locked up for almost a full day. During all that time, the strange neighbor had come down again, but this time, things changed. She begged him to give her some water, as she had run out and was incredibly thirsty, but he completely ignored her. He forcibly covered her eyes with an old t-shirt. Then he pushed her, knocking her hard to the ground, and the next thing she felt were heavy blows. She couldn't see anything, but she described them as feeling like whippings, like being hit with a belt. When the man finally stopped and left her alone again in the dark, Maya lost all remaining hope. She was sure that man was going to kill her, and at some point, she stopped trying to fight and simply waited for the end. It was impossible to escape. It was literally like a maximum security prison. And then, a literal miracle happened. She started hearing loud noises upstairs. Loud voices, heavy footsteps, and banging on the front door. Maya jumped up and started pounding on the basement door with her hands and feet, screaming with what little voice she had left that she was there, that she was inside, and for someone to please help her. At that exact moment, the basement door flew open. The police had arrived shortly after Ethan's father made the call. The neighbor had tried to remain calm at first, denying everything. But when the officers insisted on entering and searching the house, something in his face completely changed, and the officers noticed it immediately. They forced their way down into the basement, and there they found Maya. She had been locked inside since the day before. She had bruises all over her body. She was completely traumatized, but she was conscious. Maya was alive. Ethan tells us that the first thing Maya did when she stepped out of that house was look for him among the crowd of people that had gathered outside to see what was happening, and that when she saw him, she burst into tears without saying a single word. The neighbor was arrested by the police that very same night. The following days were incredibly difficult. Physically, Maya recovered from her injuries, but what took much longer to heal was her mind. For weeks, she barely ever left her house. Sometimes she would send Ethan text messages at random hours of the night without saying anything special, just to know he was still there on the other side. And Ethan always replied instantly. At the end of his story, Ethan tells us something that I think is deeply important. What he has thought about the most since the kidnapping is not the terror he felt or the night he went with his dad to knock on that door. It's the fact that there were several times when Maya asked for help and absolutely nobody believed her. Her mother didn't believe her. Her own father didn't either at first. Just think that if he hadn't stayed strong, if he hadn't broken down crying in the middle of that street and risked everything, this story would have ended in a horrible tragedy. What a dark and murky case, folks. If you like these videos, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like.